Okay, we're going to open our Bibles to the 18th chapter of Exodus. We've been in chapters 15, 16, and 17. We followed the great wonder of God in parting the Red Sea and coming across onto this new land, the land of freedom for them. They have escaped from not only the bondage of Egypt, but also the threat that Egypt might re-subjugate them. God has completely destroyed their army. God has broken their spirit. God has humbled them completely. And now this slave people, they are the honored of God. They are God's firstborn. We mentioned that back in chapter 4, when God was talking to Moses and preparing him for what he was doing and why he was doing it, and what he was to tell Pharaoh at the very beginning, that Israel is my firstborn. And if you don't let him go, I will have to take your firstborn. And we had that study as we dealt with after the plagues, and we came down to the last plague. We had the death of the firstborn and God instituting the Passover feast. And in the Passover feast, they would slaughter and roast and eat a lamb in each home. And during the night, they were to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and on the lintel. And during the night, God would pass over them. The angel of destruction would strike down the firstborn in each household. They were God's. They belonged to God. They were declared by God in that night to be His. And we're introduced to the idea of the devoted thing, the Karen. Later, when we get Israel into taking Canaan, God had declared they were devoted to Him. They were His. And in Jericho, even the spoils in the first fruits, those were under the ban, it says. It's that word, kerim, and which meant they belonged to God. And God, the gold and silver was to be brought into the temple of God, but all of the animals were to be slaughtered. And all of the people under the ban were to die. Now, these firstborn were like that. They were to die unless they were within the safe houses. They were the redeemed. They became the central thought for the rest of the Bible. The central thought of the redeemed. And the ultimate fulfillment of that is in Christians. We are the redeemed of God. They were devoted to death, but they did not die. We, to become God's redeemed, must die with Christ, that we might live with Him. We must consider ourselves as dead. We must put to death the desires of the flesh and submit ourselves to God's will. All of that is bound up in the story of the redemption of the firstborn. We also saw God exchanged the firstborn of Israel for the Levites. And so the Levites became God's people. They counted them out, 22,000 Levites. And there were 22,473 firstborn. It just almost matched. So they had to pay a certain amount of, what was it, a shekel per individual 473 shekels into the treasury of God to redeem the remainder of those who were not taken or replaced by the Levites. So in a sense, the redeemed become the priests of God. And that becomes a thing. They also had said in the very beginning, the Israel, well, let's see, wait a minute. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's chapter 19. We'll get to that tonight. Israel was a nation of priests. The whole nation. But especially these Levites. Now, all of this language becomes significant as God develops his themes throughout the Old Testament, and as they find their completion then in the New Testament with Christ. In their trials, we have had them meet a water that was bitter. God solved the problem. Then they came on into the wilderness of sin, and there they needed from God food to eat. Their food had run out. God gave them manna from heaven. They wanted meat. God gave them quail that came in the evening. In the evening, God gave them the quail, and in the morning, God gave them the manna. And when they were through then in the wilderness of sin, they began passing through the mountain passes in groups toward their destination in Rephidim. In Rephidim, they were at the foot of the holy mountain, although they were not in the place where God intended for them to camp yet. And this is where we are basically. In chapter 18, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Okay, we have a repetition. 3 times we're told, Jethro is who?
Moses' father-in-law.
Father-in-law. Moses' father-in-law. You got that? Okay. Why was Jethro, this Midianite out in the middle of nowhere? How is it that Moses came to be married to Jethro's daughter? How'd this happen? Anybody remember?
Where he fled to 40 years earlier.
Okay. He had fled from Egypt when he was 40 years old, spent 40 years in the land of Midian, and was taken in by Jethro, who was the priest of Midian, or a priest in Midian. And you remember Moses had defended his daughters at the water well, and they came home telling their daddy about it, and they said, bring him here. What are you doing leaving him there? Bring him home. And they took him in, and eventually Moses married Zipporah, his daughter, and had 2 sons. Now, who were the Midianites again? What were they to the Israelites in their early history? In the history, we know where Israel came from. They came from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob. Where did the Midianites come from? Because they were kinfolks.
Esau?
Okay, they came from, Ishmael.
Okay, there's Esau, was the Edomites?
Yeah, Esau was the Amalekites.
Amalekites.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. We already have. Yeah, chapter 17. I'm sorry. Yeah, I get my chapters mixed up. I get lost here a little bit. Okay, chapter 17, the Amalekites, those were from Esau. Okay, the Ishmaelites were the, no, wait a minute. Actually, the Midianites were from Keturah, right? The other wife of Abraham, he had, after Sarah died, you remember Abraham married again? He was such a young man, you know, 110, I think, whatever it was, when she died. And so he married again and had several more sons, and these were the sons of Keturah. I think that was the Midianites. Now I'm going to have to go back and check, and I'm not sure.
I'll check.
Check that for me. Anyway, the point is, they are descendants of Abraham. They were Midianites with the Ishmaelites when the brothers sold Joseph into slavery.
Yeah, you're right. It's Genesis 25. They're connected to Abraham through Keturah.
Through Keturah, okay. So through Keturah. Now, but they were all one big family, and they were the forerunners of the modern people that are called Arabs. In Alabama, they're called Arabs.
Did they worship God?
That's right.
Well, that was what I was going to come to. That's a very good question. Now, we know that there was a lot of idolatry, but it appears that Jethro was treated with quite a bit of respect as the priest of Midian. He apparently knew Jehovah. Maybe he did not worship Jehovah as exclusive God. Maybe he did like so many did. They had various gods that they worshiped. Even the Israelites did. And a lot of this drama in Exodus is God teaching them the truth about himself. Yes?
You know, in line with that, Terry, when you look in the first verse, it says, Jethro heard of all that God had done. That's Elohim, that's kind
Yes.
of God in general.
Right.
But then by the time you get to the 10th verse, it says, he says, this is Jethro's words, blessed be the Lord. That's
Right.
Yahweh.
That's
so,
Yahweh.
you know, he obviously, at least at that point,
Right.
is willing to give
Well,
Yahweh the glory.
here's the thing. Whenever Jehovah introduced himself to Moses in the burning bush, he gave him as his name, I am that I am, which is the Jehovah or the Yahweh name, which he was to present. And they were to know him by that name. And so it was the name of promises, the covenant God, the one who made a promise to Abraham and was going to complete it. And all of what he was doing was to fulfill his promises to Abraham and to all of humanity, that in the seed of Abraham he would bless every family of the earth. So what we have is an information campaign. God is declaring who he is with great wonders in Egypt. His fame now is being spread. What is his name? Everybody is repeating it. As people learn about the parting of the Red Sea, as they did in Canaan, as you see from Rahab and Jericho, they all knew about this. As the Nile turned to blood and then washed into the Mediterranean, how could they not know about that? Those who live along the coastlands of that area. As the other plagues devastated that land, Egypt was having trade. It was the grain basket of the ancient world. They had ancient granaries. Israel was helping. As slaves, they were building these 2 granaries there in the port city. That's where they were located. It was for trade all over the Mediterranean. And that trade continued for hundreds of years. So whenever Jehovah God in his plagues touched the grain basket, they all knew about it. They had to. So now, the fame of Jehovah is reaching into all the world, and here we have Midian, or this Midianite, Jethro. Of course, he had an inside track through his son-in-law. He knew that Moses had seen the burning bush. He knew why Moses had to go to Egypt, because of Jehovah. And of course, after hearing of all that he did, as Sam has pointed out, he makes it very clear that Jehovah is the one to be praised. In verse 7, the greeting, Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord, that is Jehovah, had done to Israel, and that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. It was a beautiful reunion. How was it that Moses greeted his father-in-law? He bowed down and he kissed him. Okay. Is that how you greet your father-in-law? I don't know if he'd let me or not, you know. How did he greet his wife? We're not told. Apparently that was not important in this narrative. He hadn't seen her in a long time. Don't you suppose he did, though? I imagine he did. And his two boys hadn't seen them a long time. I'm sure he was hugging their necks. But in any case, what we have is the significance of this bond. This chapter is about Jethro. And as we read on about it, he's rejoicing in all the good the Lord has done. Now, verse 10, Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people." I want to call your attention again to that word, now I know. Okay, what does that mean? Now I know.
He believed in the Lord.
Okay.
And he had evidence to.
Here he had the proof. It's not that he didn't know before. It's not that he didn't believe in Jehovah before. I don't doubt, having heard more and more of this information, there was no doubt in his mind. But the idea of knowing and believing is threaded throughout, beginning in chapter 4 of Exodus, all the way throughout. And God is saying, I'm going to do this so that you might know that I am Jehovah. He would say that over and over again. They will believe. I'm doing this that you might know. Can you know these things? Yes, you can. And all that we know by faith. And all this philosophical debate that goes on about you guys, you got blind faith. They want faith to be something that is irrational. But in the Bible, it's not. And you can't know there's a God. You can't know the Bible is true. You can't know that. Why not? How can you know that there was an Abraham Lincoln? Did you see him? Did you hear him speak? Did you ever see anything? Were you alive? No, you weren't. How do you know there was an Abraham Lincoln? How do you know there was? I know there's a monument to him there. There's this great, beautiful statue of him in Washington, D.C., and George Washington, Thomas Jefferson.
You have historical evidence.
We have historical evidence. And so, therefore, we believe. We believe the evidence. And so, but you ask me, do I know? Yes, I would tell you, yeah, I know. I know that we had a president by the name of Abraham Lincoln. I know that. Yes.
You see the same language when Abraham offered Isaac, that God says, now I know that you fear God. I mean, God knows the hearts, He knows everything, but it was going through the proof of what's taken place that, it's been validated. It's undeniable.
That's a very important point in the Bible, from God's point of view and for our point of view. A lot of this has to do with confidence, and that's the problem that we lack. And it was a problem with Israel. Now, all of this, his trials that we're looking at, chapter 15, 16, 17, 18, these trials had to do, did they believe in Jehovah? Well, yes, they did. They saw the plagues, they saw that the sea parted. But when it came down to, I'm hungry, I know that Jehovah is there in that cloud, and what good is it doing us? We're hungry. Right? Where is He? Where is Jehovah? I think that's what you and I have to deal with in our lives. In many occasions, it's not that we doubt that there is a God, but maybe we doubt the providence of God. We doubt the love of God. We doubt the mercy of God. When it comes right down to it, do I trust God when I get into trouble? Is He going to be there for me? And that was the issue leading up to this chapter. So when Jethro says, now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, he knew that because Egypt was full of the pantheon of all the gods, and he was greater than that. Yes, Brandon?
It says in Exodus 12:12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment.
Exactly.
I am the Lord.
That's exactly the point. That's what God was demonstrating by these plagues, and especially by that last one. That there was no God in Egypt that could stop Jehovah. Number one, they were just chunks of stone and wood. That was it. They couldn't walk. They couldn't talk. They couldn't do nothing. Almost said something vulgar.
I love how that verse in his statement there, verse 11, Jethro points out they dealt arrogantly with the people. They dealt with presumption,
That's
instead
it.
of presumption to
Yes.
put yourself in the place of God, which is literally what Pharaoh was doing. But anytime we go against God, that's what we're doing.
And what we see in that declaration is not only is God more powerful, but He's right. He's right and He's just. You understand that the modern day unbelievers do not just attack God, that He exists. They more commonly attack the reasonableness of the Bible. They attack the righteousness of God. They want to discredit the morality of God. And so they have all of their excuses and all their reasonings that justify their sins, and with every one of those, they are diminishing and challenging the righteousness of God, as if God is, racist or anti the good of the planet or something like that. It's always a foolish argument of some kind. But it's their way of declaring themselves to be righteous and God to be wicked. There's nothing in the Bible that there is no act of God in the Bible that we can read about that shows God as being unrighteous in any detail in the Bible. But they will look for that and they will pick at it. Yes, Brandon?
To go right along with what you're saying, chapter 15, verse 11, who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders?
Exactly. Who is like God in His holiness? Who is like God in His righteousness? And that was what Pharaoh had confessed. He says, I have sinned. My people have sinned against you and against your God. And he says, Jehovah is righteous and we are wicked. That's the conclusion of all of this. It's not just believing and knowing, it's recognizing that God is right. And that it's those who disobey Him that are wrong. And it will be that way on the day of judgment. Everybody who has an excuse to justify why they didn't serve God on this earth, and they have all of their arms, and they just know that if they have to stand before God one day, they have a lot of arguments they're going to make before their God. You think? You think they're going to be able to make those arguments? No. No, I don't.
Let God be found true
and every man a liar. Exactly. Well, I'm trying to get some to see that in this drama, and it builds more and more, you have a major defense of God, and this is the foundation for the whole plan of salvation in the rest of the Bible. Let's go ahead and read some more about what Jethro has to say. In verse 12, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, there it is again. Brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Okay? We know that just a few chapters later, God will prohibit any Israelite from performing a sacrifice if he's not a priest of the family of Aaron. We haven't gotten there yet. But there already were priests. This man in the Bible calls him a priest. God accepts. Israel, Moses accepted Jethro as a priest and his offering as a sacrifice acceptable before God. What kind of sacrifice is this? By the way, we had that study with Adam some time back, you remember? Where he talked about the different sacrifices. Do you remember that? What kind of sacrifice is this? You remember? What kind of sacrifice do we learn about later where you bring the sacrifice and then you have a feast and everybody eats together and they rejoice?
Peace offering?
Pardon?
Peace offering?
Peace. Very good. Peace offering. This was a peace offering sacrifice. Okay, and so that's how you explain also chapter 19 and verse 22, where as they're approaching the holy mountain, he says, and let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves. There's no priest until chapter 28. Where did these come from? Well, there were priests. As a matter of fact, we had a priest in Genesis, remember? Melchizedek was a priest. Okay, and Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. Okay. Verse 13, and the next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning till evening. And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and His laws. God hadn't given them the law of Moses yet, had He? But He had. Pardon?
But he was a wise old man, and he was explaining
Yes.
things that Moses hadn't even thought about.
Well, here's the thing. We talk about the three ages, right? The last age, of course, is the New Testament age, and the middle one is called what?
Mosaic.
The Mosaic age. What's the first one? Patriarch. That's that ugly word, patriarch. The Patriarchal Age, okay? What did that mean? Well, God dealt directly with patriarchs. And so within families, within patriarchal families, they had priests. And so What was the law of God under the patriarchs? We don't know. They were not written down. But I have an idea. We have, from the law of Moses, we have an idea it was very similar. What Moses is teaching now, the statutes of God and his laws, and what, of course, Jethro would also believe and teach. This is what Jethro was advising him to teach. These were things that were known in that age. And it says that's what he was doing. He would teach them the statutes of God and his laws. What is the difference between a statute and a law? I think it's got to be just a point of view, don't you think? It's still a law. A law is a statute, a statute's a law. But they are described in different ways. Remember, the word for law in the Hebrew is what? Come on, I'm going to repeat this over and over again. What is that word? Instruction. Okay? When God gives a law, what is it? It's instruction. What does that mean? God is instructing us on how to live. Now, are these suggestions? No, they're more than suggestions. God's laws, God's instructions. When God says, here is how you ought to live. Here is what is right. Here is what's wrong. That's instruction. Or you can call them laws, which is what the word means. Yes?
One of the things that I think we have to remember too is the Old Testament writers didn't write like we do, which can create some confusion. There may be some that's brought after the law is given that's kind of brought into this narrative, just like when people are confused that Saul doesn't seem to recognize David when it says, talks about the interrelationship, and you understand they're given a quick summary of who David is, big picture in Saul's life, then it picks up the narrative. And so it may be doing a little bit of this because, like you said, God deals with them as patriarchs and the principles. From a technical standpoint, usually statutes are like specific applications of law. So law is the general principle, and you have statutes, and like in contract law that I deal with, you have certain principles, but then you have certain explicit things that are, this is how you carry out this law. Just like, you'll have, like, love your neighbor as yourself is the law, but a statute is when you see your neighbor's ox in the ditch, don't leave them there. That's an application of that law.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think that's very likely what's going on here. And like you say, there's a lot that it's very brief. There's a whole lot more going on here, and that's being implied over and over again throughout here. This is a very brief history, and God has certain points that He's emphasizing. Now, Moses, he says, what you're doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. You shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter that they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times, and any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. Yes?
Brother Terry, right then and there, that Moses listens to his father-in-law's great wisdom. But then he didn't have to go to God and ask him was it okay for him to do what his father-in-law suggests he does.
Yeah.
Because God already says to them, as Moses
Right.
speaks, sure as I speak.
Right.
Whatever he says, I say.
Right.
So he already had that authority.
Right.
You know, and I like God because he gave him leeway too.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
You're
we
being
can
real
see that.
technical here, the Rose.
Huh?
You're being real technical here, aren't you?
Oh, okay, well.
No, that's good. That's good.
And
Oh,
this is like, in a way, like the selection of the elders of the church
Yes.
today. Not exactly,
Mhm.
but it's instructions that's given
Right.
in that same way.
Well, he was right, was he not?
Oh, sure it was.
Here he's trying to judge. He's trying to have personal Bible classes with 2 or 3 million people. Okay?
Electronics, he's just speaking.
Now, let me tell you, when I have home Bible classes with 10 or 15, it's overwhelming to me. You know? Imagine 2 or 3 million. How are you going to instruct all those people? How do you do that? Well, you're going to have to delegate. The things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, what does it say? Commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. Who said that? The Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul said that. This is what we must do. And of course, that is not necessarily delegating authority. It's a matter of teaching and passing the teaching on. Here, there had to be some judging, and the judges, he said, had to be what kind of men? Verse 21.
Honest.
Number 1, he says able men, but what does it mean by able men? Okay, men who are able to think and to judge, but what kind of judgment? Men who fear God, number 1. Number 2, who are trustworthy. What does trustworthy mean?
Honest.
Okay, they're going to be honest. That's integrity. You understand that's not common? Most men are liars and thieves.
They have
Okay, yes.
those who hate dishonesty. That's
Okay. This is integrity. Yes.
I was gonna say with trustworthiness, let's say you have a dispute. If you go to the mediator in this case, if both sides trust them, it is better even if one of them doesn't like the outcome.
Absolutely.
If they trust the person,
Yeah.
then they'll at least respect it.
Well, here he goes on to say, and hates a bribe. Okay? In other words, they're not for sale. Now that takes integrity. We have a problem in our times. We have such a large number of Americans who have no integrity. And so we elect them into political office. And they say they're going to do one thing when they're campaigning, but when they're elected, what do they do? Depends on who has the most money, you know.
They join that group up there.
Yeah. Well, that's a major problem, okay? That's called corruption, okay? They are for sale. They don't hate a bribe. Now, there's a lot of ways you can disguise a bribe. We've learned that. Politicians have some amazing ways to hide a bribe, but it's still a bribe. And they are for sale. But a man of integrity is trustworthy. And he says...
Terry, that word, I'm sorry to interrupt
Yes.
you. The word trustworthy there, it could also be translated and is sometimes faithful.
Faithful.
That's a word that we've been really building on.
Yes, we have. That's right. Good point. Yeah. It's a word that God is introducing throughout Exodus and now into the Psalms. But going back to God's promises and God keeping His promises, because God is a God of truth, which means what?
Faith.
He's faithful. The word, remember the word truth in Hebrew is the word amen, or a form of that word, amen. And you have, When Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, that word is amen, amen. In the Greek language, it's a Hebrew word's put there. Amen, amen. It's not even Greek, it's Hebrew. Yes?
I was gonna say, you said faithfulness. I know stability or stable comes from that. Sort of the same thing over and over.
That's right.
And that's something that justice or in anything that we do, we want it to be the same. And
No people can prosper if there is not trust, if there's not integrity. If we don't have trustworthiness, you cannot have justice. You cannot have order. Here the Lord is bringing righteousness to a people, and it's a great blessing to them to learn this. But now, you can't just say, all right, there are 3 million souls and they're God's firstborn, they're all righteous. Unfortunately, they are not.
They're all human.
Yeah. And some more wicked than others. Okay, and he's picking out these men who would be in charge of the judging of the people. And so Moses listened to the voice, and there's obvious good reasons for that. Let me at least introduce chapter 19. Yes, go ahead.
One of the things I think is important down here too is he's distributing leadership, which, you know, when you become too dependent on one person, there's a lot of frailty to that. Whereas entrusting others within the people to be able to make that right judgment, to provide the wise counsel, strengthens the whole nation because you've created a lot of stronger points, put them together. And he's also kind of decided a district court system right here, because everything can be elevated to 50s to 100s or whatever and never reach Moses. Obviously, it appears probably if you've given greater numbers, you probably have better, reasoning stuff, those kind of abilities.
When he says over tens, that sounds to me like a prayer group. I mean, this is a small group, in which you're going to get together and you're going to have someone who will be the stable voice for the small groups. And then it's not really a hierarchy, but it is a distribution of the responsibility. Somebody has to be responsible.
Well, it sets up stability in the sense of, obviously Moses lasts for a little bit longer, but what happened if he just killed over before he ever set this up, and then you have 3 million people with no head?
Yes.
You have that stability. People.
You're building for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's clearly true. Well, I see our time is just about gone. Chapter 19 is a marvelous, marvelous chapter. It's leading us into the giving of the law. The drama here, we want to be sure that we completely appreciate, because Hebrews chapter 12 repeats it with even greater detail. We have repetition of the events of this chapter in the Psalms. Israel never forgot throughout all their history. They never completely forgot the things that happened here in this chapter. We have a date at the beginning of it on the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land. You remember they had left on the Passover, which was in the middle of the month, so the 15th of the month. Okay, so we have another 15th, the 2nd moon, and now the beginning at the 3rd moon, we're beginning the 3rd month. This month has a name called Sivan, S-I-V-A-N, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right or not. But this does, again, give us an idea of how many days have passed since they had left Egypt. And then he says, on that day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into wilderness of Sinai. And they encamped in the wilderness there. Israel encamped before the mountain while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall say, that you shall speak to the people of Israel. Here's the beginning of the chapter. And as we say, it is, he's there at the mountain of God, the same mountain where Moses saw the bush burning that never burned up, from which the voice of God called him and told him to go to Egypt and to liberate those people. He says, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings. Isn't that beautiful? I bore you on eagle's wings. That becomes a familiar figure for us in the Bible. The eagle would teach the eaglets to fly. I've never seen this. They would actually carry their babies on their back while they're learning to fly. Let them fly. I don't know if they had to catch them if they didn't do it right or what. But it's a beautiful picture of God bearing his people, Israel. Well, thank you, everyone, for your comments and for this class. Lord willing, we'll go ahead and dig into chapter 19 in our next study.